They welcomed strangers as gods, and that single act of grace ended everything. Drums still echoed across the lake. Flowers still floated on the causeways. Then the silence came, and it came fast. 200,000 people woke that morning, not knowing it was the last morning. Children carried maize to market. Priests climbed the steps of Templo Mayor before dawn, as they had every day for 100 years. The smell of copal incense drifted across the water. The city breathed. It was alive, more alive than anywhere else on Earth. How does the greatest city in the Western Hemisphere vanish in 730 days? Tenochtitlan, 1519. Built on a lake no one thought could hold a civilization, it held 5 times more. The island city rose from Lake Texcoco like a fever dream. Causeways wide enough for 10 men walking shoulder to shoulder. Aqueducts carrying fresh water from the mainland. Floating gardens called chinampas that fed 250,000 souls without a single acre of conventional farmland. Contemporary Spanish accounts, written by men who had seen Seville, Venice, Constantinople, described arriving at the edge of the lake and falling silent, not from strategy, from shock. This was not a village that grew large. This was a planned metropolis. The Tlatelolco market alone, the commercial heart of the empire, operated every day with 60,000 buyers and sellers. 60,000. That's larger than most European cities of the era, contained in a single marketplace. Hernán Cortés himself wrote to King Charles V that no market in Spain could compare in size or order. The precision humiliated him. He wrote it anyway because he had no other words. Walk the causeways at dawn and you would have heard everything at once. Merchants arguing over cacao beans, the currency of the empire, the low bellow of conch shell horns from the temple summit, water lapping against the chinampas, green and heavy with squash. Smell the roasting maize, the fresh-cut flowers brought daily from the southern shores, the mineral sharpness of the lake itself under the rising sun. Tenochtitlan did not sleep. It cycled. It pulsed. The Mexica had built this in less than 2 centuries, from a wandering people with no land and no allies to the beating heart of a tribute empire stretching from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific. Every province, every conquered people, every vassal city sent tribute here. Jade, feathers, gold, chocolate, cotton cloaks by the thousand. The wealth of a continent funneled into one island city on one high-altitude lake, and the Mexica stood at the center of all of it. But the very thing that made them untouchable had made them hate it. November 8th, 1519, Hernán Cortés arrived at the southern causeway with 400 Spanish soldiers, 16 horses, and thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors, every one of them a people the Mexica had conquered, humiliated, taxed, and sacrificed. The Tlaxcalans didn't follow Cortés because they feared him. They followed him because they despised Tenochtitlan more. This is the detail history buries. The Spanish did not conquer the Mexica. The Mexica's own empire did. Moctezuma II walked out to meet them. He walked out, not in retreat, not under duress. He walked out in full regalia, jade and quetzal feathers, gold sandals, a retinue of lords who had never bowed to any living man. He extended the greeting of a sovereign to what he believed might be the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, arriving from the east as prophecy described. The theological weight of that moment, of a living emperor offering deference to an unknown, cannot be overstated. It was the crack in the dam. Think of a structure that has held for 2 centuries under impossible pressure, every wall perfect, every joint sealed. One crack. That's all it takes. But this wasn't metaphor. This was geopolitics. Cortés understood what Moctezuma did not, that the gesture of welcome was, in the language of conquest, surrender. Within 7 days, Moctezuma was under Spanish custody, politely, diplomatically, lethally. The most powerful man in the Western Hemisphere, host of the world's greatest city, became a political hostage inside his own palace without a single sword drawn. His lords watched. They said nothing, because they had no framework for what was happening. Nothing in Mexica history had prepared them for this. Then came the invisible villain, the one no army could fight. Smallpox arrived in April 2020 with a single infected soldier in the army of Panfilo de Narvaez, sent from Cuba not to help Cortés, but to arrest him. The soldier died, the virus did not. Variola Mayor moved through Tenochtitlan with a mathematical efficiency that the Mexica had no word for because they had never seen it. No immunity, no framework, no treatment. Contemporary accounts describe entire neighborhoods going silent within days, not from fear, but from incapacitation. Cuitlahuac, the new emperor, who had finally expelled the Spanish in the Noche Triste of June 2020, died of smallpox within 80 days of taking power. 80 days. The ground split, leadership gone, no successor prepared, the army sick, the city surrounded. August 13th, 1521, dawn. The air over Lake Texcoco was gray with smoke. The smell was not incense anymore. It was wet ash, decomposing wood, something underneath that survivors could not name and would not name later in their accounts. Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor, was captured attempting to flee by canoe. He was 25 years old. He held the city for 75 days against a siege that cut the aqueducts, blocked the causeways, and starved a city of 200,000 into silence. The bodies could not be counted, not because the Spanish didn't try, because the city had become the burial ground itself. Contemporaries described streets so dense with the dead that movement required stepping over them. The lake, which had sustained the city for 200 years, carried corpses to its shores for weeks. Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, writing decades later from Nahua survivor testimonies, recorded one word to describe what remained: desolate. It held everything. What survived was wrong. The great causeways, cracked and bloodied. The Templo Mayor, burned to its base on Cortés's orders. The chinampas, still green, impossibly, still producing food for people who were no longer there to eat it. The market at Tlatelolco, silent for the first time in living memory. Not closed, just empty. Estimates of the dead from siege, disease, and the collapse of the tribute system range from 150,000 to 240,000 within the city alone. The true number has never been established because the administrative systems that would have counted them died with the empire. The meticulous Mexica record-keeping, the tribute tallies, the census structures, gone. There was no one left to count, or those who remained could not yet speak of what they had seen. Cuauhtémoc was tortured, his feet burned, to reveal the location of Mexica gold that largely did not exist in the quantities Cortés imagined. He said nothing historically confirmed. He was executed 3 years later. The last emperor of Tenochtitlan died at 28 years old, tied to a tree in the lowland jungles of modern Tabasco, far from the lake city he held until it could not be held anymore. The irony that history almost swallows, the Tlaxcalan allies, the people who fought beside Cortés, who provided the siege knowledge and the numbers that made victory possible, received almost nothing. They were promised autonomy, they received absorption. The conquerors they enabled consumed them alongside everything else. Mexico City was built directly on the rubble of Tenochtitlan. The stones of Templo Mayor became the foundation of the metropolitan cathedral. The lake was drained over centuries until nothing remained of the water city but the ghost of it under the grid lines of a modern metropolis. In 1978, electrical workers digging beneath downtown Mexico City struck a carved stone 8 feet across, the Coyolxauhqui disc, a masterpiece of Mexica art, buried under the city for 450 years. They had been walking above it every day. They never knew. For centuries, the fall of Tenochtitlan was taught as inevitability, as progress, as the natural order of stronger meeting weaker. But look at what was actually lost: a water management system that engineers still study,
an agricultural method, chinampas, that modern permaculture practitioners are reconstructing as a response to soil degradation, a market system that achieved 60,000 daily participants without a single traffic authority. Systems built not from ignorance, but from a completely different understanding of how humans could organize themselves on this planet. Does that sound like something only the past could produce? The patterns repeat. They always have. Complexity does not protect you from collapse. Sophistication does not make you visible to those who choose not to see you. And welcome, that most human of gestures, has always carried risk in a world that mistakes grace for weakness. Tenochtitlan did not fall because it was fragile. It fell because it was surrounded by people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain, and because the diseases of one world had never been invited to negotiate with the immunity of another. They built a city on water against every rule of what was possible. They held it for 200 years. They lost it in 2, and most of the world has never spoken their name. History doesn't just bury bodies, it buries the blueprints of what was possible, not as ruins, as a mirror for anyone willing to look directly into it. The people who survived were not the strongest, they were the ones who remembered. If Tenochtitlan deserves to be remembered, not just in textbooks but by the world, share this, tell someone, because the only thing more tragic than what happened on that lake is forgetting it happened at all. This is Rekindled Empires. I'll see you in the next era.